Okay, Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you all for coming. Inshallah, we have this from now until around 2ish, maybe 2:15, youth talk with Imam Akram. The topic is manners in Islam and specifically talking about the rights of others on Muslims. So, Sheikh, inshallah, will start the talk and then we're going to pass by you cards if you have any questions that you would like to not to ask directly, but we encourage interaction, and also if you have questions you'd like to ask verbally, please come to the microphone for the time of questions. Okay, Sheikh Akram, please.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, today's topic is about rights of others. And there is a narration that I want us to keep in mind, inshallah ta'ala, while we are going through this talk. So I'm going to share the narration, and inshallah this is going to be what we are reflecting on throughout the session, inshallah. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one day a companion by the name of Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma, he said, رأيت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يطوف بالكعبة ويقول ما أطيبك وأطيب ريحك. So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was circling around the Kaaba, and he was saying how pure you are and how pure is your fragrance. ما أعظمك وأعظم حرمتك. And how great you are and how great is your sanctity. And then he said, والذي نفس محمد بيده لحرمة المؤمن أعظم عند الله حرمة منك ماله ودمه وأن نظن به إلا خيرا. So then the Prophet Muhammad said, the sanctity of a believer is greater to Allah than your sanctity. Again, the Prophet ﷺ is talking to the Kaaba in his wealth, in his life, and to assume nothing of him but good, right? And obviously in the Arabic language, when it's the masculine form, this also encompasses both genders. So, the importance of this narration here tells us that for every believing man and woman in this room, you hold greater honor than the Kaaba itself. Right? Sahih narration and Sunan Ibn Majah. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is the one who is telling us this. And the reason why this is important is because the question I want us to reflect on is, wa'udhu billah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us if somehow after this session we decide to check our phones and we decide that we're going to go on Twitter, where everybody gets their news now, right? Can't trust the CNN and Fox News stuff anymore, or never really could, right? So now Twitter is the place to go for news, fastest way to get the news. And we go and we see that something happened to the Kaaba. So and so came in and hurt the Kaaba, destroyed the Kaaba in some way. How broken would we be as Muslims? Like, it would not only be like a day of mourning, it'd probably be like a year of mourning. It'd be like a horrible thing. Our hearts would be torn apart, our souls would be broken, we'd be filled with so much rage. So the question now is, when we see our brother and sister in Islam being hurt, being oppressed, being spoken bad about, being backbit, being slandered, how do we feel? Would we feel that same anger? Would we feel that same frustration? Would we feel that same heartbreak? And if the answer is no, why not? Because the Prophet ﷺ told us that the sanctity of the mu'min is greater than that of the Kaaba. Right? This is extremely important. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, He says, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبِلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا وَاذْكُرُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ إِذْ كُنْتُمْ أَعْدَاءً فَأَلَّفَ بَيْنَ قُلُوبِكُمْ فأصبحتم بنعمته إخوانا وكنتم على شفا حفرة من النار فانقذكم منها كذلك يبين الله لكم آياته لعلكم تهتدون. Hold firmly to the rope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do not be divided. He's talking to the ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Muslims. Remember Allah's favor upon you when you used to be enemies, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala united your hearts. So you, by His grace, became brothers and sisters, and you were at the brink of a fiery pit, and He saved you from it. And this is how Allah makes His revelations clear to you so that you may be rightly guided. So in Islam, every human being has a two-tiered responsibility. On one side, we have that which Muslim scholars refer to as huquq Allah. These are the duties that we owe to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and these are the obligations that must be carried out for us to fulfill our responsibility to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what are some huquq al-ibad that we have? Can somebody name some huquq al-ibad? Salah, perfect. What else is huquq al-ibad? Or, no, sorry, huquq Allah. I'm talking about huquq Allah. Sorry, forgive me. But yeah, we're getting there. Huquq Allah, yes. Quran, reciting Quran, yes, that's a huquq Allah. Anything else? Siyam, that's a huquq Allah. What else? Zakat. Yeah, basically the 5 pillars, right? Huquq Allah are 5 pillars, right? So when we use the word, right, so this is, for example, praying our 5 daily prayers. It falls into that category of huquq Allah. And so if a person isn't praying their salah, we're in violation of those rights. And when we use the word rights here, there is a legal obligation here. And generally that makes people feel obliged that if they don't do it, that they would be kind of like a criminal in some form of another. And from a legal sense, that may carry some truth. But in reality, if you look at it from a spiritual stance, what is happening is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes something fard on you, He is telling you that this is the most important thing that you can do. And that this is what you should be focusing on to gain the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it is as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that the fara'id are the category of actions that is the most beloved to me. Do these, focus on these things, and you will come closer to me than anything else. Right? So, because we always tell ourselves what? Oh, it's bare minimum to pray 5 prayers a day. Technically true, but when you phrase it that way, you make it seem like it's an insignificant thing, when in reality, the obligatory prayers were made obligatory because they are the best acts of prayers that we can perform. So you're getting up for tahajjud and then you fall asleep through fajr, you miss the point. Right? The fajr was more important. And if that's going to be the case where you get up for tahajjud and it causes you to miss fajr, then stop getting up for tahajjud. Make sure the fajr comes in first. Right? So these are the top priorities, the huquq Allah. And that's what the same category is, zakat, hajj, Ramadan, and so on. All of it from huquq Allah. And there is a hadith Qudsi where the Prophet Muhammad said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, مَا تَقَرَّبَ إِلَيَّ عَبْدِي بِشَيْءٍ أَحَبَّ إِلَيَّ مِمَّا افْتَرَضْتُهُ عَلَيْهِ. That I do not get, my servant does not draw near to me to anything more loved to me than the religious duties that I've obligated upon him. And he continues to draw even closer to me with the nawafil, with the extra deeds, until I love him. And when I love him, I am his hearing in which he hears, I am the sight with which he sees, and his hand which he strikes, and his foot which he walks. Were he to ask something of me, I would surely give it to him, and were he to seek refuge with me, I would surely grant him refuge. Okay? So these are the huquq Allah. Now there's a second tier to all of this. And this is what Muslim scholars call huquq what? So we have huquq Allah, and then the rights of the people will be huquq nas, close, huquq al-ibad, right? The servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the rights of the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that belong to one another, right? So we must ensure where we are dutiful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are also mindful of the rights that we owe one another. Now unfortunately for many, this connection does not resonate. In our minds, we have registered that as long as I worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and my beard is growing, and I have my hijab wrapped, and I'm in the front saf, and my tilawah is good, and my tasbih doing it every day, and I'm on the path of Allah, regularly giving charity, this makes me an ace Muslim, I have secured my spot in Jannah, I am done. But this is not the case. And the reason it's not is because Islam is a full, complete system. It has never been about individuals. If we don't build communities, Islam will not be sustainable. This is why if you look at the obligatory actions, when done in community, there's more reward. The prayers, when you do it in jama'ah, it's what? It's more rewarding. Hajj, I mean, come on, what better community is there than that? You can't even walk 1 foot without bumping into someone, right? Zakat, what's going on in zakat? You are helping the poor increase their wealth, community, right? Shahada is done in front of who? The community, right? When you do Ramadan, who do you break your fast with? The community, right? Every one of the 5 pillars of Islam, when done as a community, it increases in its spiritual effects and in its reward. Right? So Islam is about building families. Right? It's about building core units. It's about building a nation, a humanity, a brother and sisterhood within all human beings. And so if this is accomplished, we don't only have individuals that are walking towards Allah, but we have a whole body of human beings that are walking towards Allah, and that is what the deen wants from us. Right? And let's look at the example of prayer. When we pray in congregation, we promote good as a team. Right? Think about this. When we start every prayer, we start with one statement. That statement is what? When you start the prayer, what do you say? Allahu Akbar, takbir, yes. You're addressing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're claiming His greatness that is greater than everything. Right? In Arabic, if you look at the term Allahu Akbar, it's actually an incomplete sentence. Allahu Akbar, right? People say, I'll translate it as Allah is the greatest, and although that is true, a literal translation will be Allah is greater. And then blank. Then what? That's the point. Fill in the blank. Right? Whatever you put in the blank, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is greater than that. Greater than everything. So whatever I was planning to do during this time, I left to come here. I left to go to work. I left work. I left my bed. I left school. I left the gym. You have chosen to sacrifice something for you to be sitting here right now in this talk. And when you go and pray, so that when you stand and you say Allahu Akbar, it's not just a statement, but it's actually substantiated through your actions because you actually mean it. And Allahu Akbar than whatever was holding me back earlier today. And even when we do the hand raise motion, it's a figurative motion that I'm throwing everything behind me and now I'm just focusing on Allah. And then the whole procedure of salah, praising Allah, having a conversation with Allah, bowing, whispering in His greatness, standing before Him, pinning our head, whispering His greatness again, finishing with praise, salawat, making dua. The whole thing is actually a very reforming experience if you actually know what you're doing. We start by addressing Allah, and through the whole act of prayer, we're engaging with Allah, and we're taking it a step ahead with each posture, and then in the end, what do we say? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, addressing the people and the angels that are around us, peace be upon you, and Allah's mercy, right and left. So I start by speaking to Allah throughout the prayer, but when you end, you address mankind. So the point of reflection here is what? Every ibadah starts with us building a bond with Allah, but at the end of it, it's supposed to return us back to the world, and we make a commitment to human beings that this ibadah made me a better human being. Now peace be with you, because that is all that you will find with me. And so every act of ibadah that we do personally needs to be, first of all, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but with the extra goal that it will make me a better human being quantitatively. If you become more of a jerk, more obnoxious, more jealous, more arrogant when you're engaging in ibadah, then the ibadah is not sincere, because it's supposed to lead to humility, and humility does not tolerate this. Right? And in order for a person to be humble, they need to learn to وَغْضُضْ مِنْ صَوْتِكَ, right? Lower your voice, right? Be moderate in your voice. تَمْشِي فِي الْأَرْضِ مَرَحًا, right? Don't walk on this earth, وَلَا تَمْشِي فِي الْأَرْضِ مَرَحًا, sorry, and do not walk on this earth arrogantly, right? These are the advices that Luqman alayhi salam gave his son. And the Quran teaches us as true believers, as beloved servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَعِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ الَّذِينَ يَمْشُونَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ هَوْنًا وَإِذَا خَاطَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا. That the true servants are those of the most compassionate, are those who walk upon the earth in a humble manner. And when the foolish address them improperly, they only respond with peace. So we do not become equally ignorant when someone shows us ignorance. And the rest of the verses of Surah Al-Furqan, Allah describes the spiritual state of the servants of Allah. وَالَّذِينَ يَبِيتُونَ لِرَبِّهِمْ سُجَّدًا وَقِيَامًا. They spend the good portion of the night prostrating and standing before their Lord. وَالَّذِينَ يَقُولُونَ رَبَّنَا اصْرِفْ عَنَّا عَذَابَ جَهَنَّمَ إِنَّ عَذَابَهَا كَانَ غَرَامًا. Oh our Lord, please keep the punishment of the hell fire away from us, for it is a punishment that is indeed unrelenting. إلى آخر surah. So every ibadah, again, when I say every ibadah should what? Should make us a better human being, right? And so there's a disturbing common occurrence in communities. Right? Children complain, wives complain, right? Husband is abusive at home. And then you're shocked because you say, no way, this dude is a front saf musalli. How can he be like this? Wouldn't salah teach him better? Because salah is what? Inna salata tanha an al-fahsha'i wal-munkar. Salah is supposed to deter someone from indecency and wickedness. But there's a massive disconnect. By the way, the opposite happens too. I've had husbands in my office complaining about their wives being abusive. The opposite is a real reality too. And so in our mind, as long as I'm doing sajda, as long as I'm praying fajr, as long as I'm regular in my prayer, then I'm a better human being than you, and you will need to tolerate my horrible qualities and flaws, and they must be dismissed. We find this in all human beings, but it's disturbing to find this in Muslims, because as Muslims, we're committed to this deen. We're on the path of this deen, because we're on the path that's supposed to prevent this. So how do we change? Right? How do we change? Well, we change and we try to become quality human beings based off, first we have to know based off of what kind of people we are, right? First of all, you have to acknowledge that we are all a work in progress. So everybody in this room is a work in progress. The brother and sister that is sitting next to you, to your right and your left, is a work in progress. So you need to be merciful to them. And just because we have negative qualities does not mean to stop praying in the front saf, in case anybody misheard me. That's not what I'm saying, right? If someone has anger issues, keep praying in the front saf. Don't stop praying in the front saf, but work on controlling your anger. I'm not asking people to cut out their ibadah or shaming them for their ibadah in case that's what you heard, right? What I am asking for is a reform in character. Keep doing what you're doing, but yes, let's talk about reform in character. We're so quick to quote the example of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ when it comes to his miswak, or should we do 8 rak'at tarawih or 20 rak'at tarawih, and we should. There's no problem in that. Go ahead and engage in those good quality discussions. But let's also be quick in citing him when it comes to his character. That it should be okay for a brother or a sister to come up to you when you're angry and tell you, Rasulullah ﷺ told us, من كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر فليقل خيرا أو ليصمت. The Prophet ﷺ told us that if you believe in Allah and the last day, then you should say either what's good or remain silent. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ taught us to have good character when interacting with one another. If we as families and human beings don't understand the importance of the bonds between us, our disputes will prevent us from conquering anything outside our own four walls. Because we also need to know that perfection does not exist, right? Human beings are full of differences. Human beings are full of differences, different ideologies, different methods, different perspectives. Now that's hard to understand, we just have to go look at the Sahaba, okay? There's a story of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu and Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, who are the first two Khalifas, their senior companions. They had a huge dispute over the matter of Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anhu. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq loved Khalid bin Walid because he was giving them victory in so many battles. Umar ibn Khattab objected to this. And the reason he objected is not because he didn't like Khalid ibn Walid or anything like that, but he said to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq that he should be demoted. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq asked him why. Right? He should be demoted from the general, and so Abu Bakr said why, asked him why. Umar ibn Khattab said he's too harsh. He pushes his soldiers too much to gain victory. People are exhausted, people are dying. And also one of my other concerns is that the Muslims are starting to attribute victory to Khalid bin Walid and not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I fear that if he's not alive tomorrow, the Muslims will be weak and scared again. Right? And so Abu Bakr Siddiq, he responded and he said, what did he say? I will not sheathe the sword that was unsheathed by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? I will not be the one that sheathes Sayfullah, right? I will not be the one that does that, the sword of Allah. And so then Umar al-Khattab asked him to reconsider, and they went back and forth. They had a little bit of an argument. And Abu Bakr Siddiq, he said, this is my way. If you recall, Abu Bakr Siddiq, he wanted Umar al-Khattab to take up the mantle of Khalifa, and Umar al-Khattab said, no, Abu Bakr Siddiq should be the one who is the Khalifa. So he said, this is my way, right? When you become Khalifa, you handle it your way, right? Now after that, did they stop talking? No, they loved each other. As a matter of fact, Umar ibn Khattab would follow Abu Bakr Siddiq around, right? He would follow Abu Bakr Siddiq around, and he would try to be like him. He would try to emulate him as much as he can. And after Umar ibn Khattab or took up the mantle as Khalifa after the passing of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anh, one of the first things that he did while he assumed position was demote Khalid bin Walid from the general of the army. Almost immediately. He sent a letter to someone by the name of Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah, and he demoted Khalid bin Walid as general. Abu Ubaidah at first did not share with Khalid bin Walid. He continued to allow him to be general because there was a lot of victory, right? He just put the letter in his pocket and it was like, we'll figure it out when we get back home. For now, let's just keep moving. Now, later on, there was a disagreement that Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah had with Khalid bin Walid about how to move forward strategically, right? And Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah felt that he was right. So Khalid bin Walid said the exact same thing that Abu Bakr said, I'm the general. When you take the position of the general, you can do whatever you want, right? And Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah was like, actually, there's this little letter that I got, right? Here you go. And then Khalid bin Walid, you know what he said? He didn't say, Umar doesn't know what he's talking about. You don't know what you're talking about. He said, you are a wise person for hiding this until now, right? You didn't want to cause fitna, you're a wise person. Khalid bin Walid admitted on his deathbed that he didn't understand why Umar ibn Khattab decided to do what he did. So in his heart, he carried a little bit of, how do I say this without, being disrespectful to the Sahaba, but a little bit of confusion. Why did Umar ibn Khattab demote me? We were victorious, we were winning, and I was a good general. Why did he demote me? Until he was on his deathbed. And the people around him were seeing him about to die, and he was in his sickness, and he was saying that he wanted to die as a martyr on the battlefield. And then someone responded to him and said, it's not befitting for the sword of Allah to fall on the battlefield. And he's sitting there, and the people around him are crying, and he hears some of them say, how are we going to be victorious without Khalid bin Walid now? And then he's like, now I understand. People are not attributing victory to Allah. And he left this dunya with a pure heart. Now, how is it possible that two people can have a difference of opinion and not drag the entire ummah into it? How can two people not tear down an entire masjid board because of a difference of opinion? Ajib, right? This is like a foreign concept to us. How can two people who are brothers in faith have difference of opinion that regards human life? This is war, this is battle, it's intense. But they still remain brothers till the very end, right? There could have been a civil war. Thousands of Muslims could have died, but they were wise. They knew that pettiness would have stopped the growth of Muslims, right? It would have squashed Islam to grow. So, the important thing with this story specifically, and what I want us to take home and what I want us to take away from this, is that as brothers and sisters, and we're growing up, and we're young, and we're youth, there's going to be a lot of mistakes that you guys make towards each other. There's going to be arguments that you have. There's going to be disagreements that you guys have, right? We, unfortunately, as an ummah, do not live in a time where disunity is a luxury. We do not have the privilege to disunite. The brother and sister that is next to you, you need to have their back more than ever. Right? We are seeing more than ever people that said, oh, we have your back, and they've turned their back on us. Oh, we have your back, but we're going to fund this genocide against your people. Right? We need each other more than ever. Whatever differences that you guys have, I guarantee you, it's not life or death like Khalid bin Walid and Umar ibn Khattab. Guarantee you it's not. And if it is, then we'll talk, right? Something's going on, right? I don't know if Hillsboro, Oregon is about to, go to battle soon, so it should be okay. So every person who has a difference with a human being, what do? We try to justify it through religious language. And this is exactly what the Khawarij did with Uthman ibn Affan and Ali radiallahu anhu. They quoted the Quran, but they had messed up aqidah. And every time in Islamic history, there are key moments where the narrative could have been significantly different had the leaders just swallowed their ego and worked together. But the consequences were paid by hundreds and thousands of people because people failed to understand that sometimes patience and silence is actually a victory, and it's not befitting to create further fitna, and it's wise and being silent and patient is the wise and victorious thing to do. If you are patient and you give preference to others over the self, right? We are not the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I don't know if I'm right. I believe I'm right based off my logic and my reasoning. I don't receive revelation though. So Abu Bakr Siddiq was heavily criticized by Umar, and he said revelation has stopped. Therefore, people will make mistakes, and the best thing that we can do is consult and do our best. فَإِذَا عَزَمْتَ فَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. Right? إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْمُتَوَكِّلِينَ. So, whenever you, first of all, وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. Right? First, consult people in conducting matters, and then once you make a decision, put your trust in Allah, and surely Allah loves those people who trust in Him. There's a number of examples like this in Islamic history, right? Now the truth is, the cost of not internalizing the second part of Islamic responsibility, huquq al-ibad, is very high. Because that narration that I mentioned at the beginning about the closer you get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is through the obligations. The beginning of the narration, I actually did not recite it because I want to recite it now. At the beginning of the narration, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet Muhammad said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, which means it is a hadith qudsi. That's what a hadith qudsi means. The Prophet Muhammad said that Allah said. But it's not a verse in the Quran, it's a hadith. مَا عَادَ لِي وَلِيًّا فَقَدْ أَذَنْتُهُ بِالْحَرْبِ. What is it? Whoever shows animosity towards a friend of mine, then I have declared war against him. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is clearly warning us here. There is no reason for us to have animosity between each other as brothers and sisters. Right? As a matter of fact, it's dangerous. Right? It's dangerous to have that animosity. And the biggest thing in terms of building good bonds, and the biggest thing in terms of having each other's backs and the rights of others, is one simple statement by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is Sayyid al-Qawm Khadim. The servant of the people, the leader of the people is the one who serves them. In our life, to our friends, to our family members, to our spouses, to our children, in our life, you should always think to yourself, how can I be of service to the other person? Islam is a beautiful balance in that way. that when two people are fulfilling each other's obligations, it's a beautiful sight to see. When the guest comes over to the host's house, what is the huquq al-ibad of the guest? Anyway. Right? To be received with generosity, right? To be taken care of, to be given food, right? To be given coffee, right? Whatever. This is the haqq of the guest, right? Now, what's the haqq of the host from the guest? Yes? No, the haqq of the host, meaning what does the guest have to do for the host? Yes, Habib, talk. Respect them, that's good, yes? Don't overstay your welcome. Perfect. So, you have that balance where the host is supposed to be as generous as possible and the guest has to be as least of a burden as possible to the host. And when you have that balance, it can only result in happiness between the two. It can only result in happiness between the two. Right? Between husband and wife, whenever there's any marriage issues that get brought and I need to have the discussion, right? As soon as the discussion becomes my obligations or my rights this, my rights that, there's already a problem in the marriage, unfortunately. Right? Because had both the husband and the wife strive to serve one another in the best way that they possibly can, strive to make each other happy, then the obligations would be fulfilled without them even trying. You understand? Right? So this is what we need to take away. This is what we need to have as our mentality. When I go and get myself some water, I look around the room and see, does anybody else need water? Anybody else need water? Okay? If I am, another example, I'm praying salah, okay? I'm looking around and making sure that everybody has space to pray. There's another example of this in our fiqh as well, in siyasat al-shari'iyah, which is like, fiqh of politics, Islam and politics, where the haqq of the leader from the people that he's supposed to be leading is the people need to give him have a good opinion of him. Right? Give him husn al-dhan. Don't give him su' al-dhan. Don't give him, make sure that the leader, that you are giving the leader husn al-dhan. Okay? But the obligation on the leader is to give the people a reason to have husn al-dhan in him. You can't go invite Shakira to Riyadh and then expect me to have husn al-dhan in you. You're clearly contradicting the Sharia. You can't do that. Sorry, I'm not going to try to get too political here, right? Keep going. No names are going to be said. You can't spend $10 million on a fireworks show for New Year's Eve and then not give a cent to your brothers and sisters that are dying in Gaza. And then expect me to give you husn al-dhan. Right? I'll give you husn al-dhan if you've clearly shown that you are trying to do what is right by Allah and His Messenger. And if you make mistakes, that's fine, because we're all going to make mistakes. If we're looking for a perfect leader, my brothers and sisters, he passed away 1400 years ago. It's not going to happen anymore. There's no perfect leader that's going to exist anymore until Isa alayhi salam, right? And Imam Mahdi.
Even Isa alayhi salam, though, he is one of the prophets alayhi salam, but you said perfect rule?
Perfect leader, yes.
Perfect?
Perfect leader. Isa alayhi salam is a prophet.
The prophets alayhi salam, a lot of them accidentally made mistakes. Like Musa alayhi salam, before becoming a prophet, he accidentally killed someone. But it said to specifically be a perfect rule.
Perfect leader.
A perfect leader.
A perfect leader. Every prophet is considered to be a perfect leader. They are all considered to be ma'soom, right? They are infallible, right? And we don't, meaning that they are incapable of sin. They're incapable of fault. Mistake is not the same as sin, right? Mistake is not the same as fault and sin. Now, with that being said, what I'm trying to say is that if a leader is showing that they're trying their best and they're being sincere and they're making mistakes, then I'll continue to back you up all day, right? Even the verse in the Quran, أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم, right? That's the verse. Obey Allah, obey His Messenger, and the leaders amongst you. But look at the verse very carefully. Remember, Allah does not say one word in the Quran that isn't for a reason. Every word has deep wisdom behind it. So Allah says, أطيعوا الله, أطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم. Why does He not say, أطيعوا الله, أطيعوا الرسول وأطيعوا أولي الأمر منكم? Why does He not put the أطيع part, the obey part, in front of the أولي الأمر منكم? Beautiful. Allahu Akbar. Right? Sheikh Sha'rawi actually mentioned this in his tafsir, right, about this verse. But the ati'u Allah, ati'u Rasul, and uli amri minkum, obey Allah and obey His Messenger and the leaders amongst you. In order to obey the leaders amongst you, it's contingent on the first two. Obeying Allah and obeying His Messenger. If you're not clearly showing that you're obeying Allah and obeying His Messenger, then I don't have no reason to obey you, right? Perfect. Good stuff, right? We're doing some refuting at the same time too, right? Okay, bismillah. Another thing as well that I want us to keep in mind is that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ told us that the best people are who? Who are the best people? Are the people who are the best to their families. Yes. The best people are the people who are best to their families. And then he said, I am the best to my family. Meaning the Prophet ﷺ is the best man, the best person to ever live. And this is really true, because with family what? We can't really hide our true self in front of family. You can go to the masjid for an hour and give a 1 hour talk, right? And then go and greet people and be nice and smile and say Assalamu alaikum, and everybody is like, oh, this guy's a great guy, this sister's a great sister. And then you go home and you're just completely terrible human being at home. It's possible, right? Because at home you can't hide your true self. So when somebody is truly kind and respectful to their family and good to their family, that's a mark of a good individual, a good human being. And that is the best way to build community. That's the best way to take care of each other's rights. Because when we have strong family units, then you're also going to have a strong community. So if you want to bond with your brother or sister in Islam, make sure first you are serving your family at home, right? And again, this should apply to everybody in the family. Everybody in the family. You're making breakfast, make some breakfast for your mother and father too, and your siblings, right? You're getting some water for yourself, call out to the room. Anybody else want water? I'm going down to get water. Anybody else need water? Just simple things like that, right? You walk by your brother's room, you see that it's all messed up, and you got some time, make it for him. He's like, nah. Right? You see clothes, your mom is busy all day and there's clothes and it's not folded, go fold it for her. Right? You see your father come back after a long day of work, he sits down, he's tired, Baba, can I get you some shay? Okay, can I get you some water? Just be in a constant state, how can I serve the people around me? Right? It seems very taxing and tiring, but I promise you that if you do it consistently, it becomes a natural habit. My challenge to you guys today, make it an intention, okay, that for the next 40 days, just 40 days, I am going to be a person of service. Next 40 days. The reason why I say 40 days is because both from an Islamic and a psychological standpoint, it takes 40 days to either make or break a habit. Make good habits and break bad habits, it takes 40 days, right? 40 days of withholding or 40 days of implementing, depending on the scenario. So you want to build a good habit of being a good servant of people and serving people, then inshallah ta'ala, we do it for 40 days, it'll become a natural habit, you don't even have to think about it anymore. It'll just be natural. And everybody loves the person with adab.
Everybody loves the person with adab. When's the last time you met somebody like, oh, I love this arrogant guy? And it's funny because the hadith tells us what? The Prophet ﷺ told us that when a servant humbles himself and is loved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then his status will be raised in the eyes of the people. And when somebody wants love of the people, his status will be decreased between the people and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just look at today. All the news report, what's the guy's name? Van Jones? Van Jones? The CNN, Van Jones, right? He wanted to play the both sides thing, right? Oh, you know, I condemn both sides. And what happened? Well, what happened? Because he wants to be loved by the people. He wants everybody to love him. What happened? Everyone hates you now. You tried to play the both sides, and because you couldn't side with one or the other, neither side likes you now. And so now you trying to get the love of the people always ends up backfiring. Which is funny because I tell people that if you want the love of the people, then be humble and don't want the love of the people. But that's kind of the point. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only gives that honor to people that are humble and are not seeking love of the people, and they're only seeking the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And so service. This is extremely important, right? And forgiveness. Okay? There's a lot of mistakes that are made during this time of your guys' life. A lot of mistakes that are made. There's nothing that is worth holding a grudge on. Right? If someone wrongs you, you don't necessarily have to continue being their friend, but also forgive them. Forgive them. Forgive them in this life. So when somebody comes down 3 years down the line and asks you, oh, what do you think about this person? You're not holding animosity in your heart and we're like, oh, this, and that. Right? But forgiveness is crucial. One way that we can achieve this is anytime you are wronged by someone or you wrong someone or someone wrongs you, one thing that you want to do is when you go home, you make dua for the person that you wronged and then you go seek their forgiveness. Right? Or, if someone wrongs you, you go home, don't expect them to reach out to seek your forgiveness. Again, we're playing the balance side. If you wrong someone, it's your obligation to seek out their forgiveness. If you are wrong, don't expect them to seek out your forgiveness. Forgive them anyways and make dua for them. That way your heart is relieved of any animosity. Because anger is the disease in the heart that creates intolerance. It creates animosity. It creates bad behavior. It creates evil words. It creates evil thoughts. Anger is an emotion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us, which means just like any other emotion, it can be used for good and it can be used for bad. But the way that it can be used for bad is if we let that anger continue to manifest and marinate in our hearts, instead of trying to let go and instead of trying to forgive. Right? So we have the concept of love for the sake of Allah and hate for the sake of Allah, being angry for the sake of Allah, right? And then even then, the scholars say we don't hate the person, we hate the action, right? We're not angry at the person, we're angry at the action. Because at the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created humankind in a noble fashion. So with that, inshallah, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us tawfiq, to have kind hearts, to be giving, to be merciful, and may He give us the tawfiq to divinely inspire us with the character of the Prophet ﷺ and learn from the examples of the Sahaba. I'll now open it up for questions. What time are we going to? 2 o'clock, right? 2:15, I think.
2:15?
Yeah.
Let's say
By
by 2.
2? Okay.
Maybe 2 plus or minus 5 minutes.
Okay, done.
So please come to ask a question by the microphone. Try to keep it to one question. If you have any written questions, then please put it here. Any written questions? All right, if you have any, please drop it in the box.
was asking, a lot of the time later after the Sahaba died, there was a lot of conflict that could have been avoided. Why didn't the Sahaba prioritize why didn't the Sahaba prioritize conflict resolution?
So, are you talking about conflict between the Sahaba or conflict between Sahaba and non-Muslims?
I'm talking about conflicts between the Muslims after the Sahaba.
After
Like,
the Sahaba.
for example, the split, the Shia split, or
Okay, I
other
understand.
events that split up the Muslims. Why wasn't conflict resolution prioritized so that things like these wouldn't happen?
Mm-hmm. Good question. So first of all, we believe in the Sunni tradition that the battles that happened between the Sahaba were instigated by the Khawarij and were not necessarily the intention of the Sahaba. So we don't believe that Ali radiallahu anh intended to fight Muawiyah radiallahu anh. Right? Rather, we believe there was Khawarij in the midst that gave misinformation, that started scuffles, and it escalated and it got too big, and then things got out of control. Right? These are between the battles, right? Now, with that being said, it is also a reality that the Sahaba are human beings. They're not prophets of Allah. They're not 100% perfect, although they are the best generation. So I'm not trying to be disrespectful, or I'm not trying to be disrespectful in any way. So they're going to have disagreements, right? They're going to have disagreements.
The way in which they would resolve those disagreements later on wasn't exactly beneficial, didn't help, it actually hurt the community. And yeah,
So this goes back to what we were talking about yesterday, right?
yeah.
What is evil? We believe that everything that happens for a wisdom, happens for a reason. For the sake of Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a wisdom behind it, right? So when we say the Sahaba or the actions of the Sahaba did not benefit the community, we have to be careful of that, because the actions of the Sahaba were exactly done the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended for it to be done. Right? And there's a lot of lessons and wisdoms that we can learn from the Sahaba that, number one, people that have disagreements does not mean that one is more pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala over the other. Because what we want to see is sincere intention between disagreeing parties. Right? So two companions can have a disagreement with one another, and one can be in the wrong and one can be in the right, but both are rewarded. Because the person that was in the wrong believed they were in the right, and they had reasons to believe that they were in the right, and they did it sincerely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Understood? Right? So, with that being said, that teaches us a lesson that in order for our spirituality, in order for our salvation, the result isn't necessarily the objective that we are going for. That's not the goal. The goal is our sincerity, the goal is our effort. And the results are in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the result may end up being something that we weren't intending, something that backfired, something that it wasn't, I didn't expect this to happen, I thought I was in the right. But now the issue is that even afterwards, after the result comes about, if you were in the right, then alhamdulillah, and if you were in the wrong, then you will seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and seek forgiveness from the people that you may have wronged in the way. So we do believe in the Sunni tradition that before Ali radiallahu anh passed away, that Ali and Muawiyah did actually reconcile. They did reconcile, right? So it is, I think, a wisdom from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show that companions can have such a major disagreement, but then we still say radiallahu anhum between the people that disagreed, right?
One more thing. There would be later conflicts after that split. less about people believing they're in the right or wrong and more about power struggles at later points in time, like during the Ottoman Empire?
Well, so in Islam, I have no obligation to defend anybody except the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the companions, right? So I won't speak too much about the wrongs that the Ottoman Empire did or things like that. But yes, there are a lot of things in Islamic history where leaders did not prioritize the betterment of the Muslims and they prioritized themselves. And we look upon that with great sadness because we wish that wasn't the case. But we have no obligation in defending that, right? We only defend the Prophet ﷺ and the companions. Okay, let's get to some questions that you guys wrote down, inshallah. Okay. There's a lot of good ones here, so let me just break it down. Okay, how do I avoid backbiting and encourage those around me to do the same? Okay. Because I feel it's very easy to fall into it without realizing, but it sounds hypocritical to correct others on it while I was just participating with them. This is a good question. So first of all, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اجْتَنِبُوا كَثِيرًا مِنَ الظَّنِّ إِنَّ بَعْدَ الظَّنِّ إِثْمٌ وَلَا تَجَسَّسُوا وَلَا يَغْتَبْ بَعْضُكُمْ بَعْضًا أَيُحِبُّ أَحَدُكُمْ أَن يَأْكُلَ لَحْمَ أَخِيهِ مَيِّتًا أو ميتا فكرهتموه واتقوا الله إن الله تواب رحيم. Right? That's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us in the Quran to avoid backbiting, avoid negative assumptions of one another, avoid spying on one another, because this is equivalent to eating the flesh of your brother or sister when they are dead, which is something that you would detest, something that you would hate. Right? Fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because indeed Allah is the one who accepts repentance. So, depending on who you are, there's two ways that this can be remedied. The first thing is remember the 40-day rule. Right? If there's any good habits that you want to build or any bad habits that you want to break, remember the 40-day rule. That for 40 days I'm going to be extra conscious about backbiting. Try to recognize when it's being said around me, try to recognize when I'm about to engage in it, try to recognize if the TV shows that I watch or the content that I watch shows a lot of backbiting, normalizes backbiting. And so if you're very conscious of that for 40 days, then inshallah ta'ala, it will be a lot easier to get better, right? Now, depending on who you are, some people are hope-oriented, reward-oriented. Psychologically speaking, that means that they respond more positively to positive reinforcement. And there are others who respond better with negative reinforcement, okay? So, when it comes to positive reinforcement, if you're a person that responds better to positive reinforcement, to be rewarded after you do a good action, remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has deemed backbiting such an evil sin that there is such an extreme punishment for it. However, anytime there is an extreme punishment for something, if you withhold from doing it, there is an equally extreme reward. Right? There's an equally extreme reward. And so every person that you advise not to backbite, or every time you withhold yourself back from backbiting, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is rewarding that, right? And feel that reward. Understand that reward, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is rewarding that. And as a matter of fact, the reward not being mentioned means that it's incomprehensible, right? The reward not being mentioned means that it's incomprehensible. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will sometimes mention exactly what the reward is and what the punishment is, and sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not define the reward or the punishment. The scholars say that when it is defined, that means that is what the reward is. If it's not defined, then Allah left it with Himself because it gives the believer something to look forward to in the way that they have no idea how great the reward is going to be. Understood? So, if that is who you are, you're a positive reinforcement type person, every time you hold yourself back, every time you advise a brother or a sister to not backbite, they may scoff at you, they may kind of like, give you an eye roll, or be like, who invited Miss Sheikha, Miss Ustada here, right? That might happen. Who invited the Sheikh here? Who invited that? Right? That might happen, but deep down they know you're right. They know you are right. And their reflection of themselves is also going to be something that you end up being rewarded for. Now, if you are a negative reinforcement type person, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us that during the Isra wal Mi'raj, everybody here is over 11 years old, right? Yeah, okay. Inshallah, you guys can handle this. During the Isra wal Mi'raj, he saw a group of people who were scratching their chest and face with copper nails, right? And then when asked, who are these people? Jibreel alayhi salam, these are the people that used to backbite and trample people's honor. Okay? And so this is the balance between the hope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, if you do backbite, what should you do? What should you do? Number one is you need to immediately ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for repentance. But when it comes to huquq al-ibad, because you just wronged the right of another person, you also have to seek forgiveness from the person that you backbit. Okay? And if that scares you, if that intimidates you, then don't backbite. Right? Don't do it. Right? But I've seen this being done before. I've witnessed this multiple times, where a brother will come up to another brother and say, Habibi, I apologize, but I said something negative behind your back. This is what I said. I apologize, and I ask you for your forgiveness. Every time, it is met with a positive response. Jazakallah khair, Habibi. I accept your apology, no problem, right? I once saw, this is crazy, right? I was in Texas, and I was speaking to one of the shuyukh there after salah. I was just sitting down with him and I was speaking. There's a guy who comes while we're talking, and he sits down right next to us. And he says, Assalamu alaikum Sheikh. I'm not going to mention the Sheikh's name. Assalamu alaikum Sheikh. I'm from New Jersey, and I took a flight here because me and my friend were talking about some of the shuyukh in Texas yesterday, and I accidentally said something negative against you. So I immediately booked a flight and I came to you just so that I can apologize and seek your forgiveness in person. If he can do that, we can go 2 doors down and ask our brother or sister that we wronged for forgiveness. Right? Okay. Let's see, which one should I answer next? Somebody asked, how can anger be used for good? This is a good question. Easy. Protecting your family, right? Protecting your community. Somebody comes and tries to harm the people in ICCH. It's your anger that gets up and protects the people, right? It's your bravery, it's your valor, right? That goes up and it protects people, right? It can also be used that when you hear Allah and His Messenger being cursed or defamed in any way, that you stand up for them. You stand up for them. And we don't respond to people the same way they treat us, but it's your anger that causes you to stand up and respond in a respectful and intelligent manner. And then when you do that, people see that you're in the right, and they end up siding with you, right? It is our anger that when we see our brothers and sisters in Gaza, or in Sudan, or in Yemen, being hurt and bombed and killed innocently, it's our anger that makes us go into the streets and protest. It's our anger that makes us try to change policy. It's our anger that makes us be a voice for the voiceless. All this thing is associated with our anger being used for good. Once it gets too far to the extreme where we start compromising our principles and we start treating the opposition the same way that they treat us in an immoral and nasty ways and nasty manner, then your anger has gone too far. right? So we use that anger for good, and we have the principles that are set by Allah and His Messenger to keep us in check when it might go too far. Somebody asked, how do I push myself to read and memorize more Quran? This is a great question because this is something that I also want to do, inshallah, as well, right? I want to memorize more Quran, I want to read more Quran as well. The first thing is that one of the tricks of shaitan is making you believe that if you can't do so much of it, then you can't do it at all, right? So people think that in order for me to want to memorize the Quran, I have to go join a full-time hifz program. I have to do it 8 hours a day. I have to stop playing soccer, going to school, everything, just so I can memorize the Quran, right? That's not true. The Prophet ﷺ said, the small deeds are the most beloved because they're consistent, right? The small consistent deeds are the most beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because consistency shows sincerity. So you want to start with something that is easy for you to start with. 1 verse a day. If you're not reading any Quran at all, start with 1 page a day, right? If you're reading 1 page a day, up it to 3. If you're reading 3 pages a day, up it to 5, right? If you're reading 5 pages a day, again, remember the 40-day rule, right? You guys remember the 40-day rule? It's an important rule. Up that. After 5 days of reciting, or 40 days of reciting 5 pages of the Quran every day, now I'm going to up it to 7. I'm up it to just a little bit, right? Or when it comes to memorization, I'm going to memorize 1 verse a day for 40 days. Then after that, I'm going to move it to maybe a quarter of a page for 40 days. And then half of a page for 40 days. And you just build that consistency. You build it up, right? And then before you know it, you're just flying through it, right? But the issue is when people try to jump into the deep end without even learning how to paddle yet, right? This is what the issue comes. So that is how you can push yourself. The second way you can push yourself is by getting a group of friends to hold you accountable. This is huge, right? Because even when you don't want to do it, you don't want to embarrass yourself in front of your friends. Have a reward-punishment system with your friends. If you complete your sabaq for the day or for the week, when we get to stick together, then we meet, then alhamdulillah, there's some type of reward. So during COVID, what me and my friends used to do, we used to go over to one of my friends' house every Saturday. And it would be a group of us. And we would recite Quran to each other, we would test each other, and then we would all pick a portion of the Quran that we're going to memorize for next week. If you come next week and you don't have that part recited, or you just butcher the whole entire thing, right? You get 2 mistakes, that's it. You get 2 mistakes. If you make more than 2 mistakes in your portion, then you have to put some money in the jar, the way out of the jar, right? At the end of the month, we use that and we go out to eat, right? Whatever is left over from that jar and the bill, the person that made the most mistakes in the month has to pay for the rest of the bill, right? Or did not memorize their portion for the month has to pay the rest of the bill. So we had that kind of system. So there was some type of like reward punishment system that was going on to keep each other accountable, right? It could be anything. Get creative. It doesn't, do whatever you want. But just a way to hold each other accountable, inshallah. How much Quran do you have memorized? What is your plan to improve recitation? Do you have one? I think they're implying that my recitation sucks. Let me see if there's another question that might be on topic before I get to that one. Okay. How do we enjoin good and forbid evil? Speaking good and keeping silence, and loving and hating for the sake of Allah. Please answer with examples and details. Dang, examples and details? Not one or the other? Gotta do examples and details, all right. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran says, "Kuntum khayru ummatin ukhrijat lin-nas." Right? You guys are the best nation that has been sent to people. تَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَتَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ. You enjoin good and you forbid evil. وَتُؤْمِنُونَ بِاللَّهِ. And you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you encourage people to all believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Now how do we do this is going to depend on the circumstance. We spoke yesterday a little bit about how the Prophet ﷺ gave da'wah, and every person that he gave da'wah to, he gave da'wah to them differently. Because each person has different temperaments, each person has different interests, each person has different things that they might respond to. So he gave da'wah to Rukana radiallahu anh by wrestling him, when, doing that to somebody like Hassan bin Thabit, for example, radiallahu anh, may have not been the appropriate way to give him da'wah, right? So it's going to depend on the individual and depend on the circumstance. So how do we enjoin good? The best way to enjoin good is, like I was saying at the beginning, be a person of good character, of good adab, and a person of service. When people see that, and they love you for that, because they will love you for that, nobody hates somebody that serves, nobody hates someone that has good adab and good manners, then they will in turn either A, want to do the same, or be inspired by that action. So the best way to enjoin that good is be the good, right? The best way to enjoin that good is to be the good. And the best way to forbid evil is to direct people to good. What's an example of this? I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm hanging out with a group of friends and they decide, let's go to the hookah lounge, right? It's late at night, we want to go to the hookah lounge, okay? That would be an opportunity for you to stand up or speak up, and what you don't want to say is, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, astaghfirullah, you guys are, you're a fasiq, you're this, you're that. That's not what you want to do, okay? What you want to do is, brothers, I love hanging out with y'all. The hookah lounge makes me a little bit uncomfortable. Why don't we just go get some coffee instead? Right? And if they're like, no, we're going to go to the hookah lounge, forget you, right? They're just always like, okay, no worries. I'll go home and I'll see you guys next time, inshallah. No problem. And honestly, they're probably not even going to really feel some type of way. If anything, they're just going to feel bad. They're not going to make fun of you. They're just going to feel bad about themselves, right? For making you feel uncomfortable and making you have to leave because they wanted to do something that was not good, right? So that is how you would forbid the evil, right? Speaking good and keeping silent. I feel like this is simple. You just tell yourself one thing, okay? If I say this, will it be met with a negative response? Could it potentially be met with a negative response? If the answer is yes, just don't say it. And then ask yourself, if I say this, right, is there benefit to what I am saying? And the way you can test that is if what you are saying is, right, and you don't want to say it, is probably a good indication that you need to say it. What did I say? If something that you are saying is good, and you don't want to say it, because, it might, somebody's doing something bad and it's hard to speak up for good, right? And you don't want to say it, you don't want to face consequences for speaking the haqq and speaking the truth, then it probably means that you need to say it. If you find yourself desiring to say something, then hold yourself back, right? This is also part of humility. This is also part of humility. And ask yourself, am I saying this because it's the truth? Am I saying this because it's right? Or am I saying this because I want people to applaud me for saying the truth and for saying what's right, right? This is extremely important because there's a lot of activism that goes on now, alhamdulillah. And I talked about yesterday how, we do live in a circumstance where it is kind of like a communal obligation to be active in the political sphere. And so we always want to check our sincerity with that. That when we're invited, when somebody is giving a testimony or somebody is giving a speech or somebody, whatever it may be, right? Am I here for myself or am I here for the cause? Keep that sincerity in check, inshallah ta'ala, right? Loving and hating for the sake of Allah. Same thing. When you see something good that's pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you desire to do that same good. And then you put love in your heart for the person that is doing it, right? So if I see Tariq praying, I'm like, mashallah, I wish I could pray more too. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless Tariq and put more love, May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala love Tariq. Ameen. Right? That's good. Now, if I see someone doing something that's displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I make dua, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect me from engaging in that, because Allah, the Prophet ﷺ said what? No person makes fun of another person for a sin, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not allow that person to die before they commit the same sin. Right? So we don't want to make fun of people for the sins that they do. Rather, we say that may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect me from committing that sin. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive that individual. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide him. And then may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase love for that person while hating the sin itself. Right? So when it comes to love, we want to love the action and the person. And when it comes to hating, we want to hate the sin and not the person. Understood? Tamam. If I think of something in salah that is not related to salah, will my prayer not count? No, your prayer will be acceptable. Your prayer will count as long as you follow all the rules of the prayer, right? However, the more khushu', the more focus in prayer you have, the greater the reward will be, right? So it might decrease a little bit in reward, but it's still going to be accepted and rewarded, inshallah ta'ala. Also, what type of glasses are you wearing? I don't know, man. Those glasses that make me see. That's the type of glasses I'm wearing. Okay, does the rights of people go to non-Muslims or LGBTQ people? Yes and no, right? There are certain rights that are reserved for Muslims. For example, I'll give you an example. Husn al-dhan is generally reserved for Muslims. Okay? We assume the best of our Muslim brothers and sisters. I don't want to say we assume the worst, but we caution ourselves with people who are not Muslim, because we don't know, first of all, if they have our best, they have intention to do what's best for us. And also because they don't have the Quran and Sunnah as their guide to morality. Right? So for those two reasons, we don't know if they have our best interest in their hearts, and because they're not being guided by the objective sources of moral good, then we have to remain cautious, right? However, things like serving, respecting, treating well, right, being kind, smiling, these types of things, yes, absolutely, everybody, right? What is the best way, in your opinion, to get to Jannah? I mean, I don't know about my opinion, right? First of all, the best way to get to Jannah is by being a Muslim, right? And dying upon the deen, right? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to die upon Islam. Because if we live our entire lives as Muslim, and then we don't die as Muslims, it didn't matter. And if we lived our whole entire lives not Muslim, but we died in Islam, alhamdulillah as well, right? It's the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, right? And also the Prophet ﷺ, in an authentic narration in Bukhari, talked about his shafa', where he's going to, intercede for us on the Day of Judgment. And that intercession is going to be the vehicle that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses to guarantee paradise for every Muslim, even if some Muslims have to face punishment before entering paradise, right? And we talked yesterday about how even one moment in the hellfire is something that is going to cause us to forget any luxury or joy or pleasure from this world. So therefore we don't even want to spend a second. We don't even want to hear it. We don't even want to see it. We don't even want to smell the scent of it, right? We don't want to taste it. We don't want to even want to be near it at all, right? So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from that. But that is the best way, is by being a Muslim. Now after that, like we mentioned in the beginning, the obligations. The 5 pillars, those obligations. If you have those five obligations and you do them with sincerity and you do them right, then there will be nothing between you and Jannah, inshallah ta'ala, right? There's actually a companion that came to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, famous story, came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, what do I need to do to enter paradise, right? What do I need to do? What's the only thing that I need to do? And the Prophet ﷺ said, basically listed out the obligations. And the guy said, I will do just exactly that, and I will do no more or no less. Right? Why did he say that? I don't know why he said that, right? But he said it. He said, I'm not going to do any more or any less. But look, it is almost as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put these statements and questions in the hearts of the companions so that we learn a lesson. You understand? So what's the lesson here? Through this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us a lesson that this is exactly what you need to enter paradise. Because the Prophet ﷺ said what about this person? This is a man of paradise. He is going to do no more or no less than the obligations, and this is a man of paradise. Now with that being said though, many of the scholars, just so that I'm being fair and being transparent, many of the scholars when commenting this hadith, they say that there's a condition. The obligations have to be done perfectly, right? Which is why another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said that when we have faults in our obligations, on the Day of Judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to plug the faults of our obligations with our voluntary actions, right? And fill those gaps and fill those holes, inshaAllah ta'ala. Okay. Tamam. Got that one. Okay, here we go. Just another one. If there is a slander or lie about yourself in the community, to what extent should you defend yourself and disprove those claims? This is a very good question. Generally speaking, you want to do the best to defend yourself and disprove the claims, right? You want to protect your honor. And it would be a shame on the community. I'm just going to be honest. I feel like this weekend I've made it clear that I don't really sugarcoat things that much, but it's okay, you know. It would be a shame on the community if they continue to slander even after the person comes out and says this is not true. If a brother or sister is being slandered in the community or backbit in the community and they come out and say this is not true, there should be no reason for people to not believe him or her. Now this depends on the situation. If the slander or the backbite or whatever it is involves harming other people, there needs to be an investigation, right? The problem is in our current Muslim community in America, we don't have systems for that. We don't. And that's a big issue. So now when there's a community scandal, where so-and-so hurt so-and-so, now it basically just becomes a game of who believes who. And it's a very bad system, right? Even if there was an oppression that was done, then that's terrible, right? That's absolutely horrible. The problem is there's no actual system to prove that other than who is going to believe who, right? And there are some organizations, which I will not name, that have tried to do this. But to be honest, they're not doing well, right? It is a fard kifaya that the community needs to have. And that fard kifaya needs to be done in a way, so, however, just because there's a fard kifaya that needs to be done, doesn't mean anybody should just go and do it. It should be qualified people that go and do it, right? But if that slander or that lie, or people are backbiting, and it's something that is between you and Allah, and it doesn't involve harming other people, right? Then, if the person comes out and says this is a lie, this is not true, then we should believe them. I'll give you an example, okay? The example of zina, okay? contrary to popular belief, zina is a crime against Allah, not a crime against the ibad. It would be a crime against the ibad if it was the zina of extramarital relations, not premarital. If it's premarital, then both people, because zina implies consensual, right? If it's not consensual, that's not called zina, that's something else, right? Zina means two people consensually engaging in premarital relations. Okay? That's the one that I'm talking about. Because both parties were consenting to it, and both parties engaged in it, from the perspective of both parties, nobody was wronged as individuals. But they did wrong Allah together. Does that make sense? Right? So, if someone in the community is being backbit and slandered and saying that, oh, this person commits zina, this person does this person does that, right? And they come out, he or she, and says, this is a lie, this is not true, I don't know where you got this from, right? Unless you got the witnesses for it, you better keep your name my name out your mouth, right? Then the proof has not been established, so there is no reason for the community not to believe this individual. Forgive him and move on, right? And the person that is slandering, and if they continue to slander, there should be some type of, I don't want to say punishment because obviously we don't really have a way to enforce that, but there should be some type of reprimanding that happens to that individual. Wallahu ta'ala alam. It's really hard with these things because a lot of things happen case by case, right? A lot of things are going to happen case by case. One last question, inshallah. Yeah. Oh, what time is it right now? 2:10. La hawla wa quwwata illa billah. Sorry, I was not paying attention to the time. These are all the questions that are up here. Do you guys have any questions from the audience? No? Yes, last question. What exactly is zina? It just means having a physical relationship with someone of the opposite gender before you're married. Does that make sense? Any physical relationship with the opposite gender before you're married. And there are different levels to it. Understood? Cool. Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair.
Okay, anything else? Okay, Jazakallah khair for coming. Really appreciate it. We thank again Sheikh Akram for coming and for all the talks and share information over the weekend. Jazakallah khair. Please remember there are going to be a link with community feedback. We'd like to hear from everyone, youth, adults, everyone. Please fill it yourself and encourage your family as well to do it. Okay, Jazakumullah khair. We're gonna empty the space because the ladies are gonna take over, inshallah. So kindly, quietly, if you can free the space. Jazakumullah khair. Yes, they're taking over.